and Mr. Aerowolf decided to take his computer to the pool, and that didn't work out so well, and he's having computer issues and decided to take a date night with his wife. So tonight, Bill is going to have a nice discussion with myself about various sundry things. So let's get right to it. Bill, how have you been this past couple of weeks?
Not too bad. I think you know some of what I've been doing. We've been spending a lot of time on that other planet, Nexus, trying to see the Dominion side of WildStar, so that's been a lot of fun. But I know one thing I want to do while those other guys are here is let's rearrange the furniture because, they can't say anything, they can't defend it, and I don't like where the couch is. So let's move that around.
Sounds good. And we need to come up with some tasks because if you're not here, you get them.
That's right. That's right. You can't defend yourself. We come up with whatever it is.
Whatever we want. We're gonna redesign the whole show. We're gonna come up with something new for the next show, and they're just gonna have to deal with it.
That's right. So we're gonna try this new format. With just two of us, we're gonna try and maybe it'll be a more serious interview. Maybe this is more of a Larry King style kind of banter. I don't know. I doubt that. So I wouldn't tune out just yet. But
would it be more like a psychiatric session where I'm on the couch more than a Larry King thing, though?
Maybe that's it. Maybe we need to let Chief Sarkhan get some of his feelings out about certain things regarding Crowfall, and I think we have just the ticket this week to cover. As some of you know, Chief spends his time doing a lot of stuff for games, and he writes some articles over on MMORPG.com, and he had a article this week about some speculation about the active and passive persistence of characters. We don't know a ton of hard facts about a lot of the character progression, and the fact is, it's probably still in design. So a lot of the Artcraft guys might not even be able to answer. But like any good MMO followers in pre-release state, we're speculating like heck. Everybody does it, and heck, if I remember, that's what Artcraft opened the forums with. Like let's roll up this speculation and let's really just get it rolling and get the talking. So that's the topic that Franklin decided to cover is an interesting one because from the outset. Crowfall has sort of been compared to Eve in, I think mostly the persistent offline skill training and passive training rather, and that kind of thing. I'm not an Eve player in any sort of depth over time, so I can't really draw direct comparisons. But in reading that article, it made me think about a lot of potential roadblocks or potential. Not roadblocks, but potential little gotchas in terms of how it could deliver on the promise of that persistent character, because we know the worlds are not persistent with Crowfall. We already know that. So as far as an RPG goes, there has to be some form of persistence and progression, and that's where our characters come in, or so we were told. So that's what I think. Franklin was trying to talk about there, and based on other experience and what we know, what kinds of things could we talk about? The whole idea of the article, I think, was to just spur discussion, and from what I can tell across the Crowfall community, it has done just that. So that's what we want to talk about today. I think is to kind of. I'm going to try and ask some questions, but I want Franklin to give him a chance to talk about his theories, and maybe clarify some of the things, because the article sometimes things get lost in translation in an article. So this is probably a good opportunity, since we don't there's been some news on the Crowfall front, but there hasn't been a lot that we can really dig into officially. So we figured this was a great topic to kind of dig into, because there has been some chatter on it this week. So like I said, I think this was designed to draw a discussion, Franklin. Am I right? Is that pretty much your intention with the article?
Yeah, so based on the fact that we know so little about the game in some respects, and I've written a lot of articles about Crowfall, I wanted this time to write based on what they said we should expect from the game, their tagline, characters are persistent, but campaign worlds are not. And they've been trying to separate themselves from a very noisy crowd that's saying, well, this is just a glorified MOBA. And the way it's separating itself is through the active-passive training. And so I wanted to take a stab at, well, is character persistence in an MMO? You typically associate that with character progression. You get that RPG factor in there, and you have investment in your character. And they tie that to the internal kingdoms. And so your kernel kingdom is your home. Your character is a long-standing part of you. But then they throw this active-passive training in that's very similar to EVE. And I was a long-time EVE player. I had 3 massive accounts. I had almost my maxed out Dreadnought driver. I was driving Aurora Qual around. I understand the passive training system, so I wanted to speculate on character progression, outline a couple of concerns that may be associated with the character progression. It was not my personal stance on any of the topics. It was just to spark conversation. And I think I did pretty successful at that because the pitchforks have come out. I've been chased down with tar and torches, so let's just go through it. You ask me questions. Let's talk about each little piece and see what kind of questions we get from the audience.
Sure. Yeah, and definitely anybody in the chat, I would love, please feel free to jump in. We'll try and work some of those questions in. But again, this is all about just, speculation and looking towards some possible conclusion based on what we know. And it's, not necessarily our wishes or hopes or anything, but it's something to talk about while we wait for more stuff to talk about. So
that's always the trick, right?
Yeah.
You want to talk, it's a talk show. You want to write something, you need a topic, right?
Right. So the first thing you kind of hit on as a thing is, you chime in with the dreaded flavor of the month concept and how that might tie into Crowfall with the advantages and disadvantages. And I don't actually remember if we know a ton about how fluid those will be, if you can trade them on and off, regularly, or if those are going to be sort of. I imagine you'll be able to sort of respec those because just thinking about what they said about persistence, the promotional class will be I believe a permanent choice. But in regards to the advantages and disadvantages, how do you see those? Like, what problems? You kind of drew on one example in the article about how would a certain class would it be required? Would a certain build or a certain set of advantages and disadvantages just be required? And we don't know enough about the game or the team dynamics to really know that at all yet. But can you just expand on that a little bit in terms of how you see that potentially being a problem?
Well, keeping in mind that they've been very clear that, at least at this point of design, they've said advantages and disadvantages can be adjusted twice. At character creation and when you pick your promotion class. That's the understanding, is you only get to change them twice. Now, whether that changes or not, that's irrelevant to the discussion because it was written on that kind of dialogue that they've put out. I see that there's potential problems there with the fact that the assumption for most min-maxers is going to be there is a set requirement to a build. If you go, like in my example, polearm, of course you're going to automatically select everything that bumps up your polearm skill. And keep in mind, in my article I used a lot of fictitious numbers, like the 50-50%. That was just ease of math for the general reader. It had nothing to do with actual numbers that they've talked about as far as percentages of passive to active. It was just simply to keep the math simple. But the idea is the whole flavor of the week, flavor of the month builds will be the general consensus, at least initially, because we don't know how much it's going to be needed or not. So if you're trying to build a certain type of character, you're automatically going to pick everything regardless of fun, flavor, or challenge right off the bat. Until we know more, that's just kind of the way players tend to naturally go. They pick what they perceive to be the most powerful, and that will change over time. And so I was trying to allude to that fact that this is our first potential concern is this going to be the way people go? In the long term, probably not. In the short term, I think out the floodgates, that's going to be perception with advantage and disadvantages. You're going to take any disadvantage that is the least impacting on your character and take every advantage that gives the potential or the perceived bonus to whatever you're trying to achieve. And so, like I said, in the example with the pole arm, now that being said, we know that they've talked about the difference in a player's capability is going to be very small. So a new player and a veteran player that's probably maxed out all those points shouldn't be that different. And that leads into the whole discussion of, well, how beneficial is the whole active passive anyway, but that's a separate topic. But so that was what I was trying to get at, is that first gate of character creation, advantages to disadvantages, and how flexible they'll actually be to the perception of a new player. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. And that's that's something that is really hard, I think, these days for designers to sort of solve, because players have become so much more in tune and for lack of a better term, smarter about these kinds of things that they go in assuming a lot and assuming a lot correctly. So how we already kind of know, like you're pointing out here, what are the potential problems that we see because we've seen them before, and how do you solve for those? We'd love to say that, oh yeah, all the advantages and all the disadvantages are equally balanced, and there's never going to be a strong one for this or that. It's totally the way you want to play, but that's not going to be the case from a maybe from a design standpoint even, but certainly from a practical standpoint, how things will play out. But good.
Yeah, so exactly. I mean, because when you looked at the advantage and disadvantages screen that they showed you, and it's a mock-up, it's not indicative of any final potential sets of advantages and disadvantages. It's just that, like you said, it's that natural inherence, that history of games, that people are always going to look for the max opportunity and potential, and they're going to miss out or potentially not even consider advantages and disadvantages that could even have a greater impact than, say, 10 extra points in polearm, right? That's the type of stuff that's going to happen 3-6 months down the road as people make multiple characters and respec and start over and start working towards that ultimate build that's good for them. May not be the best build in the game, but it's good for them, right? So it's just, that was step one of understanding character progression and the potentials that are there. So,
right. So the next sort of step up that we know about and that you touch on is the idea of the promotion classes, and how those will be sort of trained. But first of all, can you? I mean, like I said, I'm not that familiar with EVE from a player standpoint. Is there a? So you are, what I understand, you can train offline different skills in EVE to a point where, do they cap out eventually, or is it just something that you can spend all of your allotted time on forever and one skill, or how does that work exactly, just to set the stage for myself?
Okay, so EVE's passive system is based on, there's 5 levels for every skill for the most part. So for example, you can get guns to 5. And then that particular skill is maxed out. The neat feature of EVE that separates it out as far as a passive skill training system is there's so many skills that you can cross-train that you can never really cap training from a passive standpoint. You have skills that take literally 6 months real time to train. So that's the difference, where I was given the example of, well, since you can't change what you do in Crowfall, and keep in mind, I never said that whether that was good or bad, I was just giving an example, is that as you pick your promotion class, you're stuck in a path that will cap out and you have nothing left to train. Now, whether that's a good or bad thing wasn't what I was trying to get at. It was just alluding to the fact that you are essentially going to be capped in what you train. And I didn't even address the number of abilities. I mean, that might take you 3 years to get there. It was just alluding to the fact that because you can't respec, you can't change your promotion class once selected, you will cap in your progression. So is that a concern that we need to be concerned with? Is it not? It's a discussion point, right? It's based on philosophy. If you like hardcore decisions, you don't like the flexibility that some games give you to swap in and out and continually train in new things, well, then it's a good thing. If you do like to swap, it's potentially a bad thing. So it's just something to discuss, right? Mm-hmm. It's something to be aware of. And so I brought it up and say, you will cap out. Unlike Eve, where if you decided you didn't want to drive frigates and you wanted to switch to battleships, well, you could do that and keep on training.
Right. So that's interesting. So we all, I mean, I think a lot of MMO players have, been lamenting sort of the loss of real, choice and consequences in games. Not everybody, but in this particular case, like you said, the promotion class is one of those decisions that you have to choose carefully because you can't change it after. And I wonder, in the context of this skill progression, if that this particular style of play is I know they mentioned tournaments and things like that would lend itself more to the flexibility of changing things around than it does to the persistence we're talking about. And I wonder if there's a conflict with that even, just so they've made a decision early, and who knows, could it change? I don't know. Could it change that you maybe could change your promotion class later on, or are there mechanics maybe that they have in mind where you could earn another one to switch into or something? But I think the progression of that is interesting because it would seem like Crowfall, being a really competitive game, obviously focused on PvP, is going to warrant a lot of experimentation with how your character is built, and so having some more of these persistent choices be there might be a point of consternation for some players, and like you mentioned somewhere in the article too about how that stuff has to be retrained. Like, if you go into a skill, and I forgot what the exact mechanic is it the disciplines that get, you would lose all of your training progression on if you were to abandon it and change to another. Is that the case?
So, right. Your disciplines were essentially runes. You get 3 of them. And the basic assumption is right now, and I will say this is a straight up assumption, is that if you take out a rune, you lose all progression with that rune. Even if you put it back, you have to start over. Now, that may be completely wrong. They may say, well, no, if you train up a rune and you swap it out, if you have another rune to put back in, it comes back. That's a decision we don't know. So I did make an assumption there that if you take a rune out, you lose all the training progression. And so based on that, there is very little flexibility. There is very little incentive to experiment because, like you said, once you pick your promotion class, you're locked in. And while I think that being locked in is good because it's important to make the hard choices, it leads itself more to the why a lot of people are saying this is more like a MOBA than it is an MMO, because there is so little flexibility in your character progression besides the active passive training layered on top of it, that you're stovepiped in with each decision into a tighter and tighter circle. And so I was trying to bring up discussion points on that without necessarily saying that's a good or bad. It's just one perceived problem with the way the progression is set up. I actually like hardcore choices, and I'm fine with not being able to re-roll, but it's a discussion point. Is that going to be good or bad for the community as a whole? And does it fit in with their concept of your character is persistent in a dissolving world? So,
yeah. No, absolutely. That is a good discussion point. Okay, so just to bank off of Eve a little bit, is there the concept there of losing skill progression in any way, whether through decay or through outright, dismissal or swapping? Do you lose progression in their persistent skills?
No. Once you've earned a skill, you've got it forever, and you can easily swap between ships at any time. And that's the difference. You're a pilot full of skills, but you own multiple ships. Here, we are a character, and your skills are tied to your character. The only way you can swap is to swap characters. And part of my discussion points and where I was causing controversy was the fact that you're requiring people to have multiple characters, And how does that detract away from your persistent character, the selling point of their tagline, and your EK? Well, if you have multiple characters, well, then now you just have a plethora of them, which is perfectly fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but once again, it starts to lead you down this fact that you're just a glorified MOBA with a whole bunch of characters that you swap out based on the type of combat you want to do. And so, from an MMO RPG type standpoint and character progression, is it sending the right message? I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I'm just bringing up the point that it potentially could be taken in a bad light for those players that are more RPG type players than just hardcore PvPers. And I hate to use the term hardcore because they just like to PvP more than they like to do other things. There's nothing wrong with that. I love PvP. My background's Dark Age of Camelot, and I spent who knows how many years in RVR. So it's a discussion point, right? How much are you locked in? How much is the character progression and the training system established supporting the quote-unquote investment into a character? That was kind of what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah. No, and I think it like you said, it's a good discussion point because from it is talked about as an MMORPG, so there are a certain contingent of players. Now there are plenty of players, and myself is most likely one of them. You buy into something early like this on emotion sometimes, or the hope, the potential of it, or in my case, when Raph Coster sort of joined the team there, that was what sold me because I was really interested in the economic side of these games. But from the aspect you're talking about in regards to the flexibility or the persistence of an RPG character, and again, that kind of does tie in with the Eternal Kingdoms that we hear are not really a big deal to gameplay, in one breath. But we're also, that there has to be something meaningful there for the people who, again, want some persistence out of RPG. And I don't want to turn this into a Eternal Kingdom show, but
right.
But I think it kind of goes hand in hand. So maybe the right way to do it is going to be not the right way, but maybe it is more of an alt-driven game. Maybe you need to bring, I'm just drawing I don't know how EVE works, but I'm thinking I've been spending a lot of time with Star Citizen and the various roles of the ships there. Maybe if you've got a specific need, you'd bring a different ship today and you bring a different character in Crowfall for whatever it is you're doing. That wouldn't appeal to me as much as having a persistent character, even if there are hard choices I had to make along the way. I'm not really interested in building up two even, let alone 3 or 4 characters that become, tools for a specific case. I don't really like that, but that does seem to, speak to the a more competitive and more PvP oriented, I think, flavor, which I think, of course, a lot of people are into that. And that's perfectly fine. It's just not the type of progression that I would see. That I would latch onto more than anything. A matter of fact, so I have only played in every MMO I've ever played. I've only had one character, really. I mean, I've had a smattering of low-level characters just to check out, but World of Warcraft, I've played one character for 10 years. Every game is just one character. I'm not an alt guy because I really like the RPG aspects of making a choice, committing to it, going through the good and the bad, whatever if it's the class nerfs or the class buffs or the whatever it is. I just think that's all part of my character development, and that's what I get out of these games more than than some of the other things. But I think Crowfall, it seems like it's going to lend itself more to the need for customization and experimentation, and I am curious to know how persistent choices will affect that. But again, these are probably all things they may be talking about or have recently talked about over in the Artcraft halls, because they're all, a lot of these decisions I think are still in process. So there's probably a lot of answers that don't even exist yet, like I think I said earlier. So let's see. How does let's talk about the active training again, I guess, because it's been a while, I think, since that was talked about. That was early. So, how does that work? I know you talk about it in your article a little bit there. So, based on your understanding, how does that work, and does that get us around any of the potential? Does that help us or hurt us in trying to get around any of this potential pitfalls you're discussing?
Well, that's a real tough one because based on what we know, active training is only going to train you up to a certain percentage, or in my example that I used, numbers of points in a certain skill. And then to finish the next part of it, and where they say, how do I say this? Your skill path of total points is going to be rather flat. So you're going to get most of your bump in your training by your active training up front, and then your passive training, which is going to take a while, will finish out the other part of it. But from 0 to max, between the veteran and the new players that have done the passive, it's not going to be a very far spread. It's based on time. We don't know anything more than that. And I used very simplistic numbers to kind of enunciate the math. For example, I said, well, if you picked all this different stuff, you could have a max polearm skill of 175. And yes, I used 50% as my math just to keep it simple, but it's probably going to be more like 60% or 70% is active, and then the last 20 or 30 is going to be passive, but that passive is going to take a very long time, But I wanted to keep it simple and just say, okay, well, you have so much of your initial skill that's based on active. That's perfectly fine, which is going to potentially open up more skill that you can train. They talked about having tier 1, 2, and 3 of a certain type of skill that's a chain, right? You have to hit one, and then you get the second one and the third one. Does this play into your total skill points? We don't know. So I tried to stay away from that aspect of the discussion. Does it help or hinder the situation? Well, it depends upon implementation. I think it's too early to speculate whether it's good or bad. My only concern with the active system is there a lack of options to train? If you can train polearm, but you only have one choice, is it really a choice? But if you get to choose between 3 different ones, maybe you're a side-swiping polearmor or a thrusting polearmor. Those are separate choices. You don't get all of them. You only get one of them, and you have to pick. Well, that's different, Oh, and somebody's saying it's 20% for active. Okay, irregardless of what the number is, the point being is, is there enough actual perceived choice in what you train, active and passive? That was kind of the discussion point I was trying to make in that whole paragraph was, RPG, character development, character progression, and choice. Well, do we have it? Do we not? It's too early to know, right? Because we don't know how many skills. We don't know how many buttons you're going to have on your hotbar. We don't know how many depths you're going to have to a chain. We don't know if you can modify a chain. It was just that basic concept. If I only have 175 points to train, do I have enough choices in what that 175 points is? Do I have branches in my skill tree? Do I have ways to customize my character within a promotion class or a basic class? Or are they all going to basically look the same, right? If I choose polearms, is every Minotaur going to be the same polearm skill, right? Or, that's what I was trying to allude at. So, but I don't think we know. It's too early.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And I think that I was going to say that would be somewhat helped with if there was a breadth of skills. The more, like you mentioned, and I'm picturing the way Eve works, if there is that true breadth of skills, that would contribute to, potentially more experimentation there. And assuming you can use those points in variable ways to customize an experiment there.
Yeah, so for example, you're looking at the picture in the article. The swordsman is a tank. Okay, well, does the tank have to have a shield? Are there separate skills? Can a tank still be heavy plate and two-handed sword? There's too many discussions we don't know. Sorry, I interrupted, but that's kind of the philosophy. Once you pick your promotion class, how much other choices are there? Because, anyway.
Yeah, I would think there would have to be a lot more, certainly than are in the picture there. You know, like you
Right.
said, if you go down the Crusader tree, there are probably things that are about a. I'm just picturing old school Star Wars galaxies, maybe in reverse here. You know, you can be a pistolier, or you can be a. Yeah, gosh, I forgot all those other sort of specializations, but you know, you would spend some time working on those skills to get them. You know, so hopefully there is more of a tree to this, and that I guess that would lend itself to some persistence if you know, someone chooses to train down a specific tree. It'll, you know, it'll take them down. You know, it'll turn out to be a commitment, so that you know, they're all knights. However, someone that specializes and spends all their time and their points in the Sentinel tree will be, you know, that'll be their version of persistence. That's how they define their character, and then I guess it depends, with or without, how they're allowed to change that. Can you, you know, do you switch over to a Crusader somehow, or do you have to then actively or and passively train it up, and like we talked about earlier, then do you lose any kind of progression in your other pursuits, I guess?
Well, in this example, you can't switch from Sentinel to Crusader because that's your promotion class.
Right.
However, that doesn't say that there might not be varying trees with under Sentinel
Right.
that you can switch between, because it says specialist ranged. Well, let's just throw it out there and say, well, one of the ranged classes is with a crossbow and the other one's a longbow.
Mm-hmm.
Can you switch between those, but you're still a Sentinel? Well, they said you can't change your promotion class, but can you respec and go down the different tree and start training over? Well, then you have experimentation, and I think that would lend to what we've been saying, that would counter the concerns. But
Yep.
if a Sentinel is a Sentinel, then you got that potential for some players to go, well, you didn't give me any options other than picking the class or the promotion class. So am I really invested anymore? I'm kind of done. Now I'm just waiting for everything to cap out. And so while that may not be a bad thing, because I know there's vocal people out there that says, well, they don't want to worry about the training at all. They just want to pick their promotion class and go PvP and skip all the other stuff. And that's perfectly fine for some people. But based on what they've been trying to say, that this is an MMO that has a persistent character and they want you to be invested through the EK and the training system, are they sending the mixed messages, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping it's because so many things are still in flux and being decided on. You know, they can reveal as much as they can because that's as much as they know. I definitely hope that we do see, you know, those promotion classes and the you know, the paths that are under them to have many. I think Albion Online does something interesting and similar in terms of the variety that you can sort of go down. You could be a fighter, and there are, I mean, a ridiculous amount of weapons you can go down the path and specialize in, and that's a choice that you make. That's going to require, I think, you know, some kind of commitment. I'd like to see the same kind of thing here because, you know, if you're going to, like you said, commit to a particular promotion class, within that is where it'd be great to have experimentation, because I think players are going to really want that. The promotion class, the archetype to obviously a main primary extent, but then the promotion classes really probably define your overall play style, but then the experimentation and specialty and maybe the min-maxing comes within those. And I hope there's a lot of choices there. We don't know yet, but that would be the place, I think.
right, and I tried to avoid the whole time thing in the discussion because that's just too speculative. I mean, if the complete training cycle of your character is a couple of weeks to a month, I can see where people are going to experiment, like I said, and they're just going to re-roll until they finally get their play style set. Or somebody says this is just the build to have, and they're going to follow it. Now, if they're going to do long-term training, I mean, even a year or two, I mean, I love long-term training. It took me a very long time, probably a year and a half, almost 2 years, to max out my first time in Dark Age of Camelot. It was all about the journey, and I loved it. There was no desire to have to be max level right away. You could take your time and enjoy it. Now, this is a different type of game. It's PvP, but the journey could still be there because a new player to a veteran, the difference in skill set should be the player's skill, not banked on their abilities. So, if there's a year-long training path and it's a hardcore discussions, I'm all for it. It's that middle ground to where it's too short and it causes retread, or it's too long and people just never commit to finish it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what the answer is going to be. That's going to be part of the combat testing. That's going to be part of all of that's going to come up. We just have to wait and see. But anyway, it's just food for thought.
Yeah, for sure. That's going to be very interesting, actually. I guess. Now you made me think about some other aspects to this. Let's see here. I don't want to. This is where I fail at a host. I think because I'm not as prepared because I'm trying to think on the fly. This is a lot harder than you said it would be, Franklin.
Hey, I'm the one on the couch here. I've got my tissue handy, and you haven't made me cry yet.
Yeah, I know. I should. Yeah, let's get to the hard questions. No, so, what will make it? And this is on topic, but maybe going off a little bit more. What will make players not be just frustrated waiting for skills to max out? Like, how is that treated in EVE? When new players come on, or even, regular players, is there, as they've talked about in Crowfall, there's not going to be a ridiculous difference between, I guess, the player, the new player, and the the tenured player, for lack of a better word. But are new players going to perceive that as an advantage? Is that going to be something that they ask, why do I have to wait for the skill to train to max? Why can't I just have it? Or, how is that, what's that like in other games like EVE?
Well, I think both EVE and Crowfall are in line with this philosophy, and it's going to come down to teamwork and how you apply yourself. And so in EVE, you can be quite effective with a lower level skill because it's about team composition. Your ship has this capability and you're supporting somebody else that has a different capability, and you go in as a fleet. So you balance that out. Well, in Crowfall, hopefully that same thing is going to happen. You're going to have teamwork. The amount of ability spread is going to be minor, so your skill's going to come in. So even though you may not be as tough or not hit as hard with the weapon because your skill points is different, you're still effective. It's based on team composition, point spreads, how you apply your tactics is all going to become in play. And I think this is true in any PvP game. If you come in as a new player and you really don't know what you're doing, you got to get with the team that does and kind of learn the ropes and work within your limitations. And so the same thing is going to happen because they've clearly said, if you go into certain campaigns and you don't meet the criteria the campaign has said, but you choose to go, well, you're probably going to get owned if you don't work together, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is what we're going to see here also. I don't think the point spreads are going to be so massive that it's going to cause you not to want to play until your skills are done, but you're going to have to think about how you're going to apply what you can do with what you already can do. And so that's my take on it. I think if someone goes in solo and they try and rely on the lower or less proficient skill set to get them through, they're going to have a hard time and be upset. But, that aligns with EVE, which is, I think, was your question.
Yeah, and I see that happening. I really hope that's the case in Crowfall. I lament the loss of teamwork, and true sort of player interdependency, even and maybe especially in combat. It's just, recent games really tried to make everything viable, if no other word, as a solo class, as a very homogenized feeling. So I do hope that there's a real need and definition of team play to, in Crowfall. Then again, but that was kind of gets back to the root of my question. Players that are coming to this game, inevitably, there's a large market for MMOs out there. Many players try the new ones, and they go in there with their own expectations and their own play styles. So if a player gets in there and they play all their other games solo, and they why do they have to wait for training? And how can will it be easy to overcome for them to look at, all right, and try to adapt this type of game, which they may have not experienced before. And that's where I guess maybe back to that early experimentation, and maybe it's they kind of have to. It's set up so that they can wade into it more, and then they make the harder core choices, like the promotion class, after they feel comfortable as well. So I don't know. I think that's going to be interesting. So I never played Shadowbane either. Has that something you've ever played, Chief?
I have not. I was overseas at the time Shadowbane was out, so and in those days in the Navy, we were lucky to have one computer on the ship, let alone being able to connect to the internet. So I completely missed the whole Shadowbane thing. However, I used to stand watch with somebody that was an avid Shadowbane player. So I've heard a lot about it, but I've never actually personally experienced it. No, sadly. I wish I had, just like Star Wars Galaxies. I wish I had experienced it, but I completely missed that boat too. Notice the Navy pun there?
Yeah, missed the boat. Good one.
I missed the boat.
Yeah, so I probably shouldn't talk too much about Shadowbane because I hadn't played it either, but it does sound, I'd be curious. I mean, do they have paths of skills there, or there's a lot of parallels from what I understand, but maybe that's something we can leave for another day. Maybe we can get a guest on who has played Shadowbane and get some of their input. I don't know if Mike or James have, but we can maybe go down that road.
Yeah, it's for a future show.
So I guess, is there anything you want to say just to sum up? If there was anything that you wrote in your article that didn't come across right now that you've read it 100 times, is there anything you want to kind of say to round it out? Just to kind of cap it off and see if there's any other points to discuss.
Well, like I said, I kind of summarized it in the conclusion that I was trying to enunciate the fact that does the passive training lead to the feeling of having ownership in a persistent character? Are they really getting what they're aiming at, or did we misunderstand what they meant by the intent of a persistent character? Being mainly an MMO player and feeling that investment in a character, and the choices that you make through the life cycle of that character kind of makes you feel like you're a part of that character. And my question was, is Crowfall going far enough with what we know, because we really don't know a lot, to make you feel invested? And I know that there was a lot of discussion on about, well, just make alts, change up, reroll, whatever. And that's fine for somebody, but my point was, are you invested in your character with the way the system is designed? And in some respects, my personal belief is, yes, you make a decision, no matter how restrictive it is, you're invested in that decision. Now, whether you choose to stay, like you said with your WoW character, 10 years with the same character, I think has to deal with the breadth and scope of those decisions. Now, systems can change. Different ways can be approached. We don't know enough at this point, but like I said, I wrote this with the entire intent of stirring up conversation, and we just have to wait and see how it goes.
Yep. Well, good job on stirring up the conversation. It's good. So, but yeah, no, I think that's really good stuff, and I'd like to see more stuff like this. I'm going to try and find some time to start writing again. And maybe get some Crowfall stuff over on some of the sites I help write for, because I think, granted, we can only speculate right now, but honestly, that's part of what we as players do best. And it seems like Gordon and Todd and everybody over at Artcraft seem really good at keeping a level head on things. They chime in, when things are ridiculous and keep everybody in check, probably better than I've seen other pre-launch communities. So I say we keep speculating, and that's what I think they want us to do, and maybe and we'll have some fun in the process. But So I know we're a little early today, but we are kind of winging the show, and based on that topic, is there anything else that we want to cover this week before we kind of wrap it up?
I'll give a shout out to Valor because he really kind of helped stir in some more conversation, and he had some very good counterpoints. And I really appreciate when someone takes the time to have a thought responsive to something. And it's interesting that they latched onto this article, but completely ignored all my others that I've written. But hey, I won't take it personal. Because, like I said, this whole time, this was written with the intent of sparking conversation. And hey, good job for me for calling out the pitchforks, But he had very good, thought-out responses to his understanding of what I was writing about. Yep. So I want to give him a shout-out and say thanks for that. For the rest of you that didn't read the article and still responded, well, we're just going to leave it right there.
Please go read the article. I get what Franklin is saying. But no, but that's true. And like I was telling Franklin too, just the fact that, there's discussion about it is the important thing. On the Crowfall official forums, it slowed down a bit, I think, because of the access to backers and there hasn't been any monumental new releases of news or information, so it feels a little slow. So as a community, we just got to pick it up. We're all here, we're all fans. That's the important thing. This is a fan podcast, so we're not looking to dig a grave for the game or anything. So when we speculate like this, it doesn't mean we dislike or aren't happy with anything. It's just something we got to do to fill the time, because we have all these perceptions in our heads that we always like to flesh out. So why not do it as a community and have some fun? Just keep in mind it's everybody's just their own opinion at this point.
Yeah, and we got to keep the conversation civil. And while not every opinion is popular, every opinion deserves a voice as long as it's discussed in the right way. And I think that's the takeaway from this, because I know there's been a lot of negative discussion about this, and it's irregardless of the site it's hosted on. Sometimes you just need to step back and read something and go, what were they trying to say? Not what do I assume that they're saying. And so, we as the community have the obligation to have intelligent and meaningful conversations, and whether we disagree or we completely agree with someone's take, it should be discussed in that limelight. Because, between me and Valor, I think we have complete respect for each other. And while I don't agree with everything he said and he doesn't agree with everything I said, it was a perfect conversation.
Yep, you want those conversations to happen, absolutely.
And that's what we need from the community. Stop bashing websites, stop bashing people who write articles, and just have a conversation. This particular one was kind of sensitive to some people, and I appreciate that, but it didn't need to be that way. So.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, definitely, that's cool. I appreciate you writing the article, and we'll get there. This is the best time, by the way, of everybody that follows MMOs, this pre-launch period where anything goes, so let's just enjoy it.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because there are so many assumptions. I hate to keep beating this drum about what they thought my personal preference was. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a fan of permadeath. Should we bring that into Crowfall? Permadeath after so many deaths in a campaign, or you lock out of a campaign. I'm all for it. Who's with me?
I'm with it. I think at this point we just assume that Chief is wrong about everything, and then
yes, please. Chief knows nothing. Nothing. And my, I don't even know how many articles I've written in the past couple of years proves it. Just go there.
All right, well, what do you think?
I think we should call it, unless somebody's got some questions. I think we're good.
I don't have the chat up, unfortunately. I've lost a window, so. But if there's any chat, if you see anything there, we can take it, or we can sign off, and we'll come back better and stronger with 2 additional hosts next time.
Well, it is easier to do a full hour when you got 4 people. I'll give you that.
It is.
Or even 3, you know. But we appreciate all you guys that did join us this evening. And we hope to see you in a couple of weeks. Now, take note. We are thinking about mixing things up. Our show is not exclusive about Crowfall, though that is what we've been talking about the most. So if we start chatting about other games, don't bring out more pitchforks or dynamite. We will mostly talk about Crowfall when there's something to talk about, but we're all about, as we say in our tagline, diving beneath the surface and hard questions where you can impact the game. We didn't specify game. Anyway, you guys all have a great night. You can follow us on all the usual spots over on Twitter. I will drop this into chat for you. So I'm going to mute. You go ahead and tell us where we can find you, Bill.
Me? Oh, I'm still on Twitter at real_lethality. And I keep saying I'm going to have these other things happening soon. And, I keep, stay tuned because I actually do have some other things happening soon. But sometimes work gets in the way and I got to retire, but that's not happening yet. So, but stick around for some fun.
Yeah, and as usual, you can find me over on Twitter at Chief_Sarkhan. I also have a blog, the MMO Chief, that if you want to find all my past ramblings, not just this article, but all of them, you can find them over there, not in any particular order. And yeah, that's it. That's our show. You all have a great one. Appreciate you coming out. And, follow us here on this channel. This is where we will be streaming from now on, not over on the MMORPG.com Twitch. So, anyway, have a good night. Thanks, folks.